What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to offer my review for The Shrouds, written and directed by David Cronenberg, one of my all-time favorite filmmakers. I've been following his movies for close to 40 years, ever since I saw The Fly on VHS as a little kid back in the 1980s, and I was, in love with his work and disturbed by his work, and to this day, I remain in love with his work and disturbed by his work, but only for David Cronenberg would I refuse to review a film for 6 months until I'd seen it a second time, because my initial first impression at the New York Film Festival this past fall was that it's very intense, very personal, very disturbing, but that the kind of like the plot ingredients were getting in the way of some of the more emotional and some of the more personal ingredients. And I felt like it was just a great mix of good and bad, but I just wanted to give it another shot before offering my final review. But here we are, April 2025, and I still feel the exact same way. I love the beginning of it. I love like the first 20, 30 minutes, and I love individual scenes scattered throughout. But there's something about the plot of this movie, the conspiratorial side of this movie, the political side of this movie, that the movie just comes completely, totally unraveled. And I wish he just said, screw it, no plot. I'm just going to focus on grief and loss and the decay of the human body and how people say goodbye and small ingredients of necrophilia. I mean, this movie definitely goes all in. Only David Cronenberg could tell this story this way. And while he's got many imitators at this point, I mean, I feel like he's got like 2 generations of people that have been kind of trying to copy some of his techniques or some of his ideas, but there's only one true David Cronenberg. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Maybe I should give you the official premise before I go any further. So the official premise is Karsh, 50, is a prominent businessman. Inconsolable since the death of his wife, he invents Grave Tech, a revolutionary and controversial technology that enables the living to monitor their dear departed corpses as they decay in their shrouds. One night, multiple graves, including that of Karsh's wife, are desecrated. Karsh sets out to track down the perpetrators. And I should add that Vincent Cassel plays Karsh, Diane Kruger plays his dearly departed wife, Becca, as well as her sister, Terry, as well as an AI creation by the name of Honey. And we also have Guy Pearce here as Maury, and Maury is the ex-husband of Terry, the second character played by Diane Kruger, and kind of a hacker or just all-around tech guy that Vincent Cassel uses sometimes when he's feeling like it, and sometimes he uses other people, which hurts Guy Pearce's feelings. And yeah, already I can tell I'm getting bored by getting too mired in the plot, because the plot is constantly threatening to kind of spiral out of control. And what's most important in this movie and what's most interesting in this movie is the grieving process. And I should mention that this movie was David Cronenberg's way of processing the death of his own wife, Carolyn, who died back in 2017. It's funny, this movie, I shouldn't say funny, this movie has a lot in common with a lot of David Cronenberg's earlier movies. Like The Brood is intensely autobiographical. It's all about a horrific divorce he was going through. But this movie also has a lot in common with like Videodrome and Crash in terms of the intersection of the body and technology. But this movie also has quite a bit to do with The Fly, where you're dealing with the decay of the human body, because there are certain dream sequences in this movie where, I guess, how can I talk about this without going into spoiler territory? Because this movie doesn't come out until next week. I'll limit my description to this. The first character, played by Diane Kruger, Becca, when she was dying of this horrible disease where basically her bones were rotting away and different parts of her body kept having to be amputated. But in spite of those amputations, the character played by Vincent Cassel, Karsh, continued to desire his wife, and possibly even desired her even more as a result of some of the mutilations and amputations that she was being subjected to. And he's exploring all this with his dreams, while at the same time, through this technology that he's invented, constantly observing her decaying skeleton at this point. And probably the best scene of the movie is the very first scene where he's on a date with another woman his age.
When they lowered my wife into the coffin, I had an intense urge to get into the box with her.
You never considered cremation?
How dark are you willing to go?
And he's basically walking her through his obsession with his dead body and how constantly examining her corpse helps him process the grief, because upon her death, he wanted to crawl right into her tomb with her and be buried alongside her. And Vincent Cassel really sells all these crazy conflicting emotions and all these wild desires and all these wild preoccupations and fixations. Vincent Cassel, he's worked with Cronenberg a number of times. Definitely Eastern Promises. I believe he was in Dangerous Method. What else was he in? Hang on, I'm just going to do a quick IMDb search. All right, so it's only 3 times: A Dangerous Method, Eastern Promises, and now The Shrouds. So he's not threatening to dethrone Viggo Mortensen as David Cronenberg's favorite actor, but they work together really well. And like in a lot of David Cronenberg movies, Vincent Cassel's basically playing David Cronenberg. I feel like nearly every male lead in all of his movies, going back to basically The Brood, or even perhaps Shivers, I always feel like the central protagonists of his movies they're kind of a stand-in for him. I mean, James Woods in Videodrome is definitely David Cronenberg, and Christopher Walken in The Dead Zone, while that's more of a Stephen King creation because it was based on one of his books, still feels and looks a little bit like David Cronenberg with that spiked hair. Jeff Goldblum in The Fly, totally. Jeremy Irons in Dead Ringers, totally. I feel like all these characters are representing different facets of his personality, and pretty much every single guy in all of Crash seems to be representing one part or one aspect of David Cronenberg's personality. And I love that. It's what makes his movies so endlessly fascinating. His movies are intensely personal and also just constantly exploring like variations on familiar themes again and again and again. And people love to use the expression body horror, but I feel like that's very reductive, and everybody means something different. It seems like some people now just say body horror because they think it sounds cooler than just saying horror, but just showing gore does not mean it's body horror. I mean, technically you're dealing with the human body, but what people really mean by body horror is confronting your own mortality. Like when you see Jeff Goldblum in The Fly looking at his own body parts in his medicine cabinet over his sink and collecting them, that is body horror, and only David Cronenberg really knows how to go there with the same kind of scientific rigor that he's been applying for 50, 60 years at this point. And speaking of which, and I can't believe I didn't mention this at the beginning of the video, but last fall when I first saw The Shrouds and I was kind of bewildered by and perplexed by and didn't really know what to say about The Shrouds, instead I decided just to procrastinate and postpone the video by making a every film ranked filmography video about the career of David Cronenberg, which I will link down in the description below, but I'm very proud of that video. And I included The Shrouds there, but I was just being a little cowardly and a little chicken shit. I was just so reluctant to criticize one of my filmmaking heroes, which is a flaw of mine where I guess I'm either reluctant to admit that not all their movies are created equal, which is totally ridiculous if you're doing every film ranked videos. But also, I feel like when you're dealing with a filmmaker like David Cronenberg, it is possible for his movies to elude you the first time around. His movies are very complex. And it's not like he's making his movies in a particular tradition apart from his own, where he can say, oh, this is yet another film noir, or yet another one of those great screwball comedies. Like, nobody's making movies quite like David Cronenberg. And his interests, tons of his interests, fall outside the world of film. I don't get the sense that he's sitting around at night watching tons of movies and thinking, oh, how can I make movies that are kind of a love song to my heroes? I have a feeling he's reading books about dreams and talking to psychoanalysts or talking to people who design strange technology so you can observe the decay of your loved ones. And maybe that's where this movie kind of gets off track, because he seems to be very preoccupied with some extremist ideologies when it comes to whether or not bodies should be buried in the earth and whether or not that contaminates the environment versus cremation. And there's also a lot of really paranoid stuff dealing with Russian tech guys, Chinese tech guys, and Canadian tech guys, and all their various, like, how can I say this? Like all the various, like the corporate espionage they're constantly indulging in order to try and surveil one another, and how are they constantly trying to hack each other's computers and that sort of thing. And all that crap is, at a certain point, you just start to feel like it's like a snake eating its own tail, and it's like none of it's interesting, or at least none of it really seems to come together. And like a lot of David Cronenberg movies, and I say this with full love and respect and adoration, but a lot of his movies struggle with an ending. And I know he knows how to give us great endings, because a few of his movies, like The Brood, Shivers, Scanners, The Dead Zone, The Fly, they have incredibly like operatic climaxes that are just incredible. But then some of my favorite David Cronenberg movies, they don't even really have an ending. They just kind of roll over and die. And I would include Videodrome in that category, Dead Ringers, and Crash. And those are 3 of my favorite David Cronenberg movies. I love those movies. I find all of them have kind of weak endings where the movie just kind of dissolves into nothingness. Like, wait a second, like what happened? Did you just get bored and lose interest? And who knows? I don't know how David Cronenberg's brain works. Maybe he thinks he's giving us these devastating endings, but that are just, once again, they're elusive to me. But when The Shrouds works, it works pretty goddamn well. And a big part of what makes it work is actress Diane Kruger, who once again is playing 3 different roles, 2 sisters, as well as this AI construct. And the AI construct gets to such a weird, disturbing, unsettling sexual place where I was like, oh my God. And also what's great is how Vincent Cassel is constantly reacting to the events of the movie, saying like, what the fuck, in that great French accent of his. And he's constantly echoing the emotions of the audience, like, what the fuck are we watching? And he just keeps screaming it, and that's very satisfying. But Diane Kruger is fearless in this performance, which asks quite a lot of her in terms of revealing her body, but also showing the different preoccupations and like turn-ons of the two different versions of the sisters. She keeps reminding him, like, I've got my body, she's got hers. They're two very different people, but obviously when you're both being played by the same actress, it can get a little bewildering and a little confusing, especially as the I guess the boundaries between the sisters and the ex-husbands and the widows and that sort of thing all start to get increasingly blurry. There's a lot of screwing around in this movie, and a lot of it's pretty goddamn erotic. Like Sandrine Holt, who's in here, plays the character Sue Min. She's fantastic. She's blind and has a seeing eye dog, but is incredibly wealthy and incredibly powerful. She's got something going on with Vincent Cassel as well, where he can't quite figure out what is. They haven't DTR'd yet. They haven't defined the relationship, and it's we, the audience, just get to experience all of his confusion and desire every step of the way. But I feel like I haven't done a great job of articulating why I find the plot to be frustrating or unsatisfying, because I'm trying to avoid spoilers and details, and probably not very successfully at this point, because this is one of those movies that's very tough to discuss without detail. So I guess I should offer a mild spoiler warning, just because I do want to talk about one little detail, but 3, 2, 1, last warning, so on and so forth. As Karsh is examining the skeleton of his dead wife while on a date, hot date, he really knows how to seduce the ladies, but he notices all these little nodes on her skeleton, and he can't quite tell, are these like growths that are a result of the Shrouds technology, like radiation affecting the skeleton, or were they there beforehand? Like, was his wife a victim of bad luck, or was she being experimented upon, and was she being possibly monitored? And I guess that's where the movie is initially interesting, where you start to learn about how she had this very intense, passionate relationship with her professor and her doctor, who might have been trying to push her or coax her into indulging in a lot of experimental treatments, and perhaps he might have even been the architect of what was making her sick in the first place. But then the movie, just like with a lot of other David Cronenberg movies, it just through osmosis starts to spread out into areas from high concentration to lesser concentration until there's no more urgency whatsoever. And the last scene of the movie is incredibly horrific and disturbing, but I was like, what? What the fuck? Like, what was the point of this whole story? I guess, obviously, the point of the story was for David Cronenberg to process the grief of his wife that he was married to for many decades, but I don't know. I don't know if it's completely successful as a movie unless you're just fascinated by the career of David Cronenberg. I think his diehard fans are going to be really into it because they've been following his career for all this time, and they're going to recognize certain recurring themes and recurring ideas. And he's working with composer Howard Shore again, and he's working with Vincent Cassel again, and he's working with an original screenplay. And they'll just be thrilled to see him working again. I mean, Crimes of the Future was a wild movie, but he had a big break after Maps to the Stars because his career was kind of starting to fizzle out, and luckily he's had a late in life rebound, and I hope he'll make movies until his dying day, as long as he can find production companies and distributors who want to get involved with him. And that's almost kind of an inside joke, because at the beginning of the movie they show like 15 or 20 different title cards for all the different companies involved with the movie, and I'm convinced they show one of them more than once. I was like, wait a second, I recognize that one. But it's almost like a Family Guy joke or a South Park joke, where it's like, how many different companies did he have to go to assemble the resources necessary to make this movie? But I'm thrilled they did, and I'm thrilled David Cronenberg's still working. I'm thrilled that he's still fired up by the filmmaking process and still finding new frontiers to explore. Obviously, he's exploring his own personal life here and trying to add, like a framework so that you can sell it as a movie. But I would not recommend this movie as anybody's first David Cronenberg movie. If I were trying to seduce anybody into the world of David Cronenberg and expose them for the first time to his unique filmography, I would start them with precisely the movie that I started with, The Fly. I think The Fly is incredibly satisfying. It's terrifying. It's romantic. It's incredibly operatic. It's incredibly emotional. It's just a stunning achievement. A strong contender for the best horror remake ever made. Obviously, The Thing is a good contender. The Blob is a good contender. There are a lot of good horror remakes from the 1980s, remaking movies from the 1950s. But The Fly is fucking incredible. And if people are, a little bit more perverted and really into video technology, I would show them Videodrome. And if they're really into like science and medicine and doctors, I would show them Dead Ringers. Or if they're just really into Jeremy Irons, but that movie's just like, oh, it's awesome. I love Dead Ringers. Or if they really love Stephen King, I'd start them with The Dead Zone. Or if you just want to see somebody going through some real emotional pain when it comes to their own marriage and the raising of their child, show them The Brood. Or if they're just a kinky nymphomaniac, show them. I'm totally blank on the name. Shivers. And of course, if they're into like the X-Men and telepathy and that sort of thing, I'd show them Scanners. Basically everything from Shivers through Dead Ringers. I just feel like you can do no wrong. And then if they happen to be really into cars and or turned on by car crashes, well then obviously show them Crash. But for me, those are like the key defining movies by David Cronenberg that turned him into one of the world's most beloved filmmakers. And that is not to say that he's not made good movies in the 21st century, because I've seen every single movie he's ever made at least twice, and the ones that I really like I've seen many, many times over. But in the 21st century, if you were going to limit yourself to the 21st century, Spider is great, kind of artsy-fartsy material for people who really like, kind of kitchen sink, navel-gazing, like intense British dramas. Spider will win you over. History of Violence. If you're a big fan of Aragorn, you want to see Aragorn in a very different kind of movie. Eastern Promises kicks all kinds of ass. If you want to see Aragorn fighting a bunch of Russian assassins, buck-ass nude with his ding-a-ling flying around, check out Eastern Promises. What else has he made? And of course, obviously, Crimes of the Future, which has almost nothing to do with his original short, Crimes of the Future from like 1971 or 1972, but I really enjoyed Crimes of the Future quite a bit as well. And maybe I enjoyed it quite a bit just because I liked having David Cronenberg back, and I liked seeing him explore eroticism and science kind of colliding together like only he can deliver. But I'll take a pretty good David Cronenberg movie over a million of the other movies being made by his imitators. But I love the fact that there are filmmakers out there who just openly admit, yeah, I love and adore David Cronenberg's movies, and I'm doing the best job that I can to kind of tip my hat and homage to his work, while at the same time creating my own stuff. Like, the Substance borrowed from Cronenberg, and it borrowed from David Lynch, and it borrowed from a variety of sources, but I really enjoyed The Substance. I thought it kicked ass. Maybe a little long, but I am starting to ramble at this point. I'll close with this. If you're a David Cronenberg fan, of course you're going to see The Shrouds, because if you're a David Cronenberg fan, you're going to see all of his movies sooner or later. But if you're a casual David Cronenberg fan, maybe stick to his great, awesome period and go see Sinners instead. Sinners is great. Warfare is great. The Accountant 2 is good fun. Shrouds, or The Shrouds, is for the weirdos. For the people who like disturbing explorations of forbidden forms of erotica and that sort of thing, and who are interested in human decay and grief and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the appeal of The Shrouds is niche, but it goes into wide release next week. So if that sounds like it's right up your alley, then give it a go. But I think I've said all I've got to say. Let me know what you think about Cronenberg down below, and definitely check out my Every Film Ranked video, which I'll also include down in the description below. But remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.